like price controls, subsidies will require a large bureaucracy to administer. In the Department of Agriculture, there is a very large department, and the Department of Agriculture is one of the largest in terms of numbers of bureaucrats, one of the largest departments of the U.S. government. You have a very large department that does nothing but administer price subsidies. And just as you have to have people who try to eliminate corruption in the case of price controls, you also have to have people who try to eliminate corruption in the case of subsidies, of producers who claim to be producing more than they actually produce. And you have to have inspectors to go around and talk to them. Okay, you can hear me now, but I'm not sure you can see me. Okay, you can hear me and see me, splendid. So the cost to society is huge. The benefit to society is non-existent. The benefit to certain individuals is another story, of course. These are the two sides of the coin, price controls and subsidies, which governments engage in all the time because they are trying to benefit elements of the population. And since if 10% of the population gets a big benefit from a government action, and 90%, the people of the 90%, the other 90%, each one has a very small cost because it's spread over a large number of people, the people who, of the 10%, will be passionate in maintaining that situation, and the people of the 90% may not be nearly as passionate in trying to reverse or change that situation. And calculations of this kind are the basis of the school of economics that I mentioned last week, public choice. What is the basis of public choice? Why do countries do what they do? In the present situation, you should also say, why do all of these other organizations do what they do? Why do criminal syndicates, for example, operate in one way rather than another way? What is their cost-benefit analysis? Why do they benefit from certain price controls and certain subsidies, which they do in some cases? Why are they able to bear the costs involved in being illegal? And there are costs, substantial costs, and still make a great deal of money. One reason is because they're illegal, they don't pay taxes. They don't pay attention to regulations. A criminal syndicate does not have a large body of people who are following the tax laws, and they don't have a large body of people who are making sure that they fulfill all the various regulations and so on, because they don't care. They don't care about the regulations, and they don't pay the taxes. Therefore, in that sense, they are much closer to pure economic entities than many legal economic entities. Now, it's true that they have exceptional costs involved in security and involved in avoiding law enforcement and involved in legal actions to protect their people when they are arrested. But they don't come anywhere, those extra costs don't come anywhere near equaling the benefits of being illegal. And as long as those benefits far outweigh the costs, the opposite is going to be the situation in the government, which is trying to combat these criminal syndicates. That is, the costs are going to far exceed the benefits. And that's why the war on drugs, just to take one example, costs an immense fortune and has a minimal effect on the market or the production, exchange, buying and selling of the products of those who produce the illegal substances, which make a great deal of money and therefore are able to use their wealth not only to do all the things which legal enterprises do. After all, they have to transport the product, they have to store it somewhere, they have to have a sales force, they have to market and so on. I mean, think about it. Did it ever occur to you that a lot of the traffic on the roads, and I don't know about the railway so much, but certainly a lot of the truck traffic on the roads are illegal? Their contents are illegal? That many of the warehouses in the cities of the United States and elsewhere have illegal goods in them? That these criminal syndicates have entire sales and marketing forces? These are big organizations, and they are very profitable organizations. But similar calculations are made by by the NGOs, for example, the non-governmental organizations, the environmental organizations, for example, the human rights organizations. These are big players in the international scene at the present time, as well as the domestic scene. And they very often trump pure economic calculus. For example, the Keystone Pipeline from Canada to Texas, which makes all kinds of economic sense, has been blocked by the government because of the environmental lobby. Where do they get their money? They get their money mostly from donations. A famous novelist wrote a novel called The State of Fear. And this was about how these organizations raise money. They create a state of fear in the public in general, in the population. And that's how they maintain their membership. That's how they maintain their donations, the money they get from foundations of all kinds, and public entities of all kinds, and governments. And that's because they have a cost-benefit analysis which is different from the cost-benefit analysis of other kinds of organizations. Every human enterprise of whatever kind has its own particular cost-benefit analysis because it operates in its own particular set of contexts: physical, psychological, social, cultural, political, and economic. Each one is different. And in order to operate effectively, in order, for example, to effectively deal with illegal activities of the criminal syndicates, you have to understand these things. It's not just a bang, bang, shoot 'em up situation. It's not just people getting arrested and put in jail or whatever the case may be. They will simply be replaced by others. As long as the cost-benefit analysis of the criminal syndicates, I'm only using them as an example, but a particularly egregious example, as long as the cost-benefit analysis of the criminal syndicates is what it is, the cost-benefit for those combating them is going to be the inverse of that. We found that out, or we should have found that out, during Prohibition in the 1920s and 30s. The United States passed a constitutional amendment. This wasn't just a law, it was a constitutional amendment prohibiting the sale of alcoholic beverages. Okay. This developed a tremendous black market. It did wonders for the development of criminal syndicates. So this is when the mafia really went to town in the United States. It led to the production of and consumption of very low-grade alcoholic beverages that did immense health damage to the people who consumed these things. It led to not only domestic but international complications because of smuggling of alcoholic beverages in. It led to huge costs in enforcement. It led to any number of deaths and injuries as a result of gangs fighting each other and the police fighting the gangs and the gangs fighting the police and so on and so forth. It led to great quantities of bribery and corruption of the political process, of law enforcement officials, of judges and prosecutors, of municipal and state officials, and so on and so forth, so that the enforcement eventually became pretty much centralized in the FBI rather than in local entities which became highly corrupt. All of this is being replicated now with the so-called war on drugs. It's the same kind of thing going on all the time, constantly. Until eventually, what was done was that it was made legal again. They repealed the amendment. Congress repealed the amendment. It was made legal again, and all of this disappeared. Overnight, it disappeared. And what was done was to engage in public health activities and educational activities to convince people that drinking too much is bad for your health, and it's bad for your family, and it's bad for society in general. And the same thing was done with tobacco, and as a result, there is a constant reduction going on in the consumption of both hard liquor on the one hand and cigarettes on the other hand, but they're not illegal. And the amount of funds put into these educational efforts and these remedial efforts, treatment and so on, is immensely less than the cost of trying to enforce prohibition when it was in force. The same thing would undoubtedly happen, but of course, as somebody once said, the only thing we ever learn from history is that we never learn anything from history, would happen if, for example, drugs were legalized. The drugs that are now illegal were legalized. After all, alcohol is a drug. Nicotine is a drug. For that matter, caffeine is a drug, and none of them are illegal. Is marijuana a drug? You bet it is, but it's illegal. And 2 states made it legal in the last election, and this is a tendency that is taking place because the enormous costs. There are 500,000 young men, mostly black and Hispanic, in American prisons for possessing small quantities of marijuana. 500,000. These are universities of crime. They are learning to become criminals. Whereas originally they weren't criminals, they just had a small quantity of marijuana. The costs for society are huge. You cannot effectively prohibit something that people can grow in their window boxes. You can't do it. It's impossible. It can't be done. But of course, the agencies that are supposed to be dealing with the problem have their capital invested in the problem, not in its solution. So they fight against legalization of these drugs. And I have to say that it makes absolutely no sense from any standpoint to maintain the illegality of marijuana, and we should putting that money into remedial action and into education, as we have in the case of alcohol and nicotine. It makes a bit more sense in terms of cocaine and heroin, simply because they have to be imported. So a lot of the ill effects that otherwise we would have are put off on countries like Mexico and Colombia, which are beginning to understand that they are being made to pay for our addictions. And it's questionable how long they're going to put up with this particular kind of situation. So it's a bit different calculus, and of course, cocaine and heroin and amphetamines and other illegal substances are more damaging to health than nicotine or alcohol or marijuana. There's no question they are. Nevertheless, the present way of dealing with them violates all the laws of the social sciences, all of them. And as a result, they cannot be effective, they will be very costly, and they will not work. You cannot legislate people's preferences. You can make it impossible for them to get what they want, and this is what the present situation is. You're trying to make it impossible for them to get what they want. Or you let them get what they want, but you reduce the social damage to the extent possible by regulating it, by taxing it, by engaging in public health action and in educational action. Whenever, and this is the main thing I want to leave with you tonight, or today, it's not night over there. Whenever the basic principles and laws of the social sciences in general and economics in particular are violated, the effects are negative for society as a whole. They may and often are positive for certain groups within society, but they will overall be negative for society as a whole. This is always and everywhere the case. There are no exceptions, because these principles are universal. They are principles which cannot be violated without a cost which exceeds any possible benefit. Keep this in mind when analyzing what you read and what you see and what you're told with reference to actions taken by the government and by other organizations. They have every reason to try to obfuscate what it is they are actually doing and the effects of what they are actually doing. To the extent, for example, that the Argentine government lies about its inflation rate. Outright lies. The economists will no longer publish their figures. The IMF will no longer accept their figures. Well, that's a blatant case. That's easy to identify. Most of the cases are a little more complex. Making it difficult to understand what's going on is a little bit easier, etc., etc., etc. But it's not impossible. It's not impossible to find out what is really going on, what the real effect is, and to get enough honest and accurate figures to make a reasonably accurate analysis of a particular situation. And you will find, just as in the physical sciences, such as medicine, for example, if you constantly violate the rules of health, you will become unhealthy. If governments and other organizations constantly violate the principles of the social sciences and particularly of politics and economics, they will be unsuccessful, and their costs will far outweigh their benefits. So that in the one case, you have the war on drugs, which cannot be won, which is not being won, and where the costs far outweigh the benefits. And in another case, but similar case, the invasion of Iraq, which when we changed the objective was unwinnable, and the costs far outweighed the benefits, of which there were none. You will be faced with situations of this kind, both personally and in terms of the organizations you work for, constantly, all the time. And the better you are able to analyze what's going on, why the particular situation is the way it is, the more you are able to apply the appropriate rules of cost-benefit analysis, the more you are able to identify when people are prophesying rather than predicting and what the difference is between the two, the more you are able to identify people who are outright lying to you because they are using statistics in an inappropriate fashion. And incidentally, that's another thing people should study is statistics, but they don't. A lot of economists never took a course in statistics, which is a big mistake. The better off you're going to be and the better off your organization is going to be, because human action, meaning all the actions you take, all the actions your organizations, the various organizations you belong to take, human action is always goal-oriented. And the more effective and efficient the actions taken to achieve that goal, the better off everybody is, because you will get the greatest result with the smallest expenditure of wealth, energy, and time. All right, ladies and gentlemen, remember the take-home experiment. Pick a couple of hours and some day between now and next Tuesday, and try to think of all the times that you engage in a cost-benefit analysis and tell me about it. Send me an email. All right? See you next week.